Hello and welcome back to another Bible reading.
We're racing through Matthew. Racing.
We are racing through Matthew. Speaking of racing, the race is coming to an end for Jesus' physical ministry.
Yes, it is. And so a lot of interesting things are happening,
Yeah.
coming to a head.
Yeah, this is kind of, Jesus has been asking the question, and Matthew has been kind of giving us this question in bits and pieces.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the who do you say that I am has implications.
Conversations about it are easy.
Yeah.
Putting your money where your mouth is something else.
Yeah. And so it's one thing for Peter, as we're going to see, to confess Jesus as the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
But when the rubber meets the road, where's Peter going to be?
There's Pete. Yeah,
Where's
I know.
Pete? Now, we're not going to be too harsh on Peter because where's anybody?
Yeah, and he does come back.
He does come back, and he does, and what he does for Jesus when he comes back. And Jesus anticipated, expected it. He's actually going to tell Peter, hey, you're a good boy, but just know that this is going to happen.
When we get to John down the road and he has this little moment there, that'll be cool.
Yeah. So in Matthew 26, the very first verse, it says, when Jesus had finished these saying all these things. There it is again. Well, this is a different one. Usually it's when he's finished these saying, and now it's when he's finished all these sayings. His discourses are over.
Mm-hmm. The five are down, and we're going to the house.
And now he's the confrontation is coming, the plot to kill Jesus, the betrayal is coming, the denial is coming. It's a sad moment. It seems like a sad moment for the kingdom.
It does, but paradox of paradoxes. We had to get there to get where we are.
I had to get there. And so let's just read.
Okay, let's see.
And we'll make comments as we go. So when Jesus had finished saying, and I'm reading from the CSB, it's a good readable, and I like this Bible. It kind of breaks it up.
Yeah, you got it all
broken down.
I like the way that's laid out. Mm-hmm.
When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he told his disciples, you know that the Passover takes place after 2 days, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. Mm-hmm. Passover and crucifixion are going to play off each other.
He's been telling them that. He's been since the confession.
Yeah.
And they don't ever want to hear it.
No, he'll be the new Passover lamb.
Mm-hmm.
Then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the courtyard of the high priest, whose name is Caiaphas. And they conspired to arrest Jesus in a treacherous way and kill him. Not during the festival, they said, so there won't be rioting among the people.
What
Once again, they have avoided attacking Jesus at key moments out of fear of the people and arresting him. But they are now planning to arrest.
They got to do something that's getting away from them.
They are. So, while Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman approached him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume. She poured it on his head as he was reclining at the table. So first and foremost, he's being anointed.
He is, and this Simon, who is a leper, is I don't think to be confused with Simon the Pharisee, who has a similar thing happen earlier in Jesus' ministry.
Yeah, I know, but this is, and once again, Matthew, if Jesus is this king that we've been talking about over this kingdom, he's going to have his day of anointment, like Saul had.
He's a Messiah.
David had.
One. Yes.
He's the anointed one. He's the anointed king. So, but the disciples don't see that imagery.
But an odd anointing, as one might even expect.
And if you've read the Bible for long enough, odd is normal.
I know.
When the disciples saw it, they were indignant. Why this waste, they asked.
Other places we have Judas singled out, but alas, all of them are thinking it's a waste.
Well, it's kind of like Thomas. Some have doubting Thomas, but they realize they all had a moment.
Yeah, they did.
They all had their moment.
They did. Judas has the interest of he's carrying the purse, but they all think it's a waste.
Well, and sometimes you have Luke will bring out who actually said it. Mm-hmm. Matthew showing us he said it, we were all thinking it.
Yeah. Glad he said it.
It's kind of like when I tell people in class, if you have a question, ask it, because if you're asking it or thinking it, someone else is. So he says, this might have been sold for a great deal and given to the poor. Baloney.
Because they're all about the poor, right?
Yeah, they're all about the poor. A lot of times when the poor come and the children come, they say, get away.
Get away.
Aware of this, Jesus said to them, why are you bothering this woman? She has done a noble thing for me. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. And that's interesting.
So we're not going to solve poverty, are we?
No.
Doesn't mean we're supposed to be indifferent, but we're not going to solve it.
Yeah,
that's not our mission.
Jesus was definitely about the poor, but there are times when you got to prioritize.
And deal with the world as it is. We can't heal everybody. Well, he could have, but he didn't. That's interesting, too. He could have fed everybody, but he didn't. the way the world goes is not going to be solved.
So interesting. I just thought of this now. There's a spin on this because remember earlier, the Pharisees were making an excuse not to serve others, honor their father and mother because of serving God. And now the disciples are using that same teaching and say, hey, this anointing that she's anointing you, Jesus, who they've already acknowledged being the Son of God. Oh, there we go. Being the Son of God, we could help poor people with that.
Yeah.
But their reasoning behind it, it's
You're
just,
wanting to sound noble. Well, there's really no nobility here.
There's no nobility here. She's doing the right thing.
She is.
So you'll always have the poor with you. By pouring this perfume on my body, she has prepared me for burial.
She's accepting what he's been saying that they don't want to deal with.
Yep. Truly, I tell you, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. And look, we're still telling you.
Here we are talking about it.
We're talking about it. Then one of the 12, the man called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, what are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you? So they weighed out 30 pieces of silver, which, by the way, is prophesied that he would be handed over by 30 pieces of silver.
Imagine that.
And from that time, he started looking for a good opportunity to betray him.
This is so wrong.
Yeah, it's all about timing. Because if you catch Jesus in the wrong moment with the wrong crowd, you're going to have a riot on your hands.
Oh,
They knew
yeah.
that. They knew that. On the first day of the unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat Passover? Go into the city to a certain man, he said, and tell them, the teacher says, my time is near.
We saw that with the donkey a while back.
Yep, my time is near. I am celebrating the Passover at your place with my disciples. So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them and prepared the Passover. When evening came, he was reclining at the table with the 12. While they were eating, he said, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. Deeply distressed, each one began to say to him, surely not I, Lord. He replied, the one who dipped his hand in with me with the bowl, he will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to that man by whom the Son is man and betrayed. It would have been better for him if he had not been born. Judas, his betrayer, replied, surely not I, Rabbi.
Oh, wow.
You have said it, he told him. And in John's gospel, he says, go and do what you're going to do.
Go and do what you do.
Do quickly.
Yeah, and here's people try to make Judas into a noble person. He's just trying to speed up the kingdom, and he thinks Jesus is tarrying a little too long. There's nothing good about Judas.
No. So, as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed it, and broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, take and eat it. This is my body. Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and he said, drink from it, all of you, for this is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. But I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. So here's one of those verses. Obviously, if you've ever been into a Church of Christ building, you have probably heard this over and over and over and over and over again.
That's what we say.
And, which is good. Jesus, though, when he's talking about this and he's preparing, the Lord's Supper is so much more than just an act. Mm-hmm. It's so much more than just something we got it over with.
It's a covenant meal.
It's a covenant meal. It is the time in which we remember what Jesus did. We remember what all that means. And the fact of the matter, he says he's eating it with us in the kingdom.
So spiritually, he communes with us.
He communes with us. And I think 1 Corinthians 10, Paul brings that out.
Yes.
That's when we share in the table of the Lord when we partake of this meal. So this Lord's Supper, a lot of people, you try to, prove to me you have to take it. Well, I mean, wouldn't you want...
Jesus says do it, and prove to me. And,
Jesus is saying, I'm eating and drinking this with you in the new covenant. Mm-hmm. I'm eating and drinking. It's a time of fellowship. Why would you even not want to?
Yeah, you ought to look forward to that.
You ought to look for more opportunities for take. Yeah. Well, and, once again.
Another thing, there's an appropriateness here because we find out that while the church can assemble all kinds of days, and sometimes they assemble all the time, the normative is basically they're going to get together every first day of the week. And that is a fixture when they assemble. The church comes together because that is what gives them the basis for their even being there.
And it becomes the Lord's Day for a reason.
The Lord's Supper, the Lord's Day.
Well, yeah, and we call it the Lord's Day because like, oh, that's the time we have to meet. No, the Lord's Day is the day in which he was raised from the dead, where he brought hope into all the world, and we every Lord's Day take time to remember it. Like Passover would have been a once a year thing.
Yeah.
This is so much more important.
And it was just about getting out of Egypt.
Yeah.
This is huge.
This is so much more important and valuable that why not do it every Sunday it comes around?
That's another thing. People will say, well, it loses its meaning. You know what? You know how often I eat ice cream if it's around? But sometimes, it's just losing its meaning. Let's just wait about a year and try it again.
I'm going to tell my wife, hey, I ate with you dinner last night, and it's losing its meaning to have a meal with my wife. So let's do it next month.
And everything. If we did this every month, we'd all enjoy it so much more.
So and once again, I don't want to play silliness, but it really.
But it is silly.
It's silly, and when we make excuses, they really don't hold water because they don't value in every other.
It's a bless your heart moment, isn't it?
It's a bless your heart moment. So, and I like this. After singing a hymn, he went out to the Mount of Olives. I don't picture Jesus singing. I don't know why, because singing is always something that we do to praise and bless Jesus and God. But the fact that he was singing with them, I think it would be a cool moment to hear Jesus sing.
And the way they sang is a bit different from the way we sing,
Much different, yeah. All right, so now Peter's denial. I'm going to read this last section, then you can jump in 36.
Okay.
Then Jesus said to them, "Tonight all of you will fall away because of me." Ooh, fall away.
That's pretty severe, but it's prophesied.
It's prophesied. And interesting, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. This is a quote from Zechariah 13:7, and I'm going to read, because this is an interesting verse. Verse 6, though, right before it. It's talking about God's people being cleansed. It's talking about all these things that would happen. It says, if someone asks him, what are these wounds on your chest? And it's speaking about the Messiah, the suffering servant. Then he will answer, I received the wounds in the house of my friends.
Wow.
Then it goes on to quote what we just said, strike the shepherd, the sheep will be scattered, I will turn my hand against.
He came to his own. His own received him not.
And this is not just a Peter denial. This is not just a Judas betrayal. This is something bigger.
Right. Well, he's pretty much going to go through this by himself.
Yeah, in the house of his friends. Ooh.
Nothing worse than being betrayed by people you think have your back.
Yeah. And so, but after I have risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. Peter told him, even if everyone falls away because of you, I will never fall away.
And I think he sincerely means that.
I think he means it. But once again, this gets back to the question, who do people say that I am? You are the Christ, the Son of God. What do you mean by that statement?
So if you're a conquering Messiah, okay, let's get the swords out and go. But he's not.
No. And the suffering Messiah thing is still, though it's being taught, as we find out, John even tells us in his gospel, they didn't understand that fully. No. And when Peter finally realizes it, I think it's when he sees his Lord and his friend and his teacher being beaten and stripped and publicly humiliated and shamed, and going, that's what he was talking about.
Yeah, and I really think it takes that too. And that kind of courage is so much more than the warrior courage.
Yeah. And though, once again, Peter has his falling away moment, later in Acts, they can beat him, they can flog him, they can persecute him, they can command him, they can throw him in prison. He says, I'm going to do what God's asking me to do.
God said this.
I'm going to share. This goes back to our podcast that's coming out Thursday, to share in the sufferings of Jesus.
Yes. He came to value that.
Yeah, and we need to understand that Jesus, what he did, what he's about to do, he did for us, and does it have the same impact on us that it did have on Peter?
Are we going to get out of our fleshly, visceral way of responding to things, or are we going to do the spiritual, which really takes far more courage?
And this goes back to our Lord's Supper thing.
It does.
Why do we need the weekly reminder? Because I think we forget.
We do.
We forget. And when we just make it about, I got this, it's about remembering this so that we never lose our motivation.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we have to be all elaborate about it. This is so simple. It's just,
yeah.
I mean, the Bible does a lot of things like the crucifixion in very small amount of space, but the space in our heart is what counts. And it can be vast with just a few minutes of time passing.
Yeah. And so truly, Jesus says to him, tonight before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. I've always thought it said before the rooster crowed 3 times, you will deny me.
Well, you put all the accounts together and you get all kinds of things. And that's another thing about how, when you put the Bible together, from how you're looking at it and how people talk and all this, you can say different things, but you're saying the same thing.
Say the same thing. We've talked about that before.
If it does 3 times, it's doing it twice, it's doing it once. You've got it all covered.
Yep. And even if I have to die with you, Peter told him, I will never deny you. And all his disciples said the same thing.
I think he meant that too.
And there's once again, and all the disciples said the same thing.
Right.
Peter being a spokesperson a lot of times, ready to be out there. They're all thinking the same thing.
But they all flee.
They all flee, but they all come back. -1.
-1.
-1. All right, your turn.
Now, here we go. The Garden of Gethsemane. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. Not asking too much, is it? Well, apparently it is. And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, James and John, and he began to be grieved and distressed. Then he said to them, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me. So he's going to go off and he's going to pray. He said, just stay here while I go off. And he went a little beyond them and fell on his face and he prayed and began saying, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples and he found them sleeping and said to Peter, so then you men could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? That probably kind of struck him a little bit, but guess what? Keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went again a second time and prayed, saying, my Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done. Again he came, and he found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. And he said to them again, or he left them again and went away and prayed a 3rd time, saying the same thing once more. Then he came and the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand. The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand.
There's a lot here. Remember the discussion on who will be greatest in the kingdom, and the mother comes and says, allow my kids to sit at the right hand. And they're all wanting this prominent place, and yet when Jesus goes out the night before he's betrayed to pray to the Father, he's telling them what's about to happen. He's preparing them. They don't even have the thoughtfulness to stay awake during the prayer session. And a lot of times Jesus, from what I understand, would have probably prayed out loud.
Probably
a lot of their prayers were out loud. They would have heard it, and they fall asleep during this.
Yeah, no.
And you can't take this cup, when Jesus says you don't understand.
You don't understand what you're asking for.
The cup.
You can't even stay awake.
You can't even stay awake during a prayer, right? And yet we see the humanness of Jesus here.
The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Our flesh places limitations on us.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that we want to unduly beat ourselves up. And Jesus understands, even though he kind of lets them have it a little bit, he understands, and off they go.
Yeah. And but Jesus here, people have issue sometimes with this prayer. The fact that he's asking if this cup can pass.
How explain that?
Yeah, how do we explain it? And once again, Jesus is human. And the fact, the Hebrew writer brings up the fact that he was tempted in all ways.
Yes.
And though I think Jesus also being God, he would have never sinned, could have never sinned.
God can't be tempted, and yet Jesus was tempted, and Jesus is God. The mystery. But, though beyond our comprehension, he has to be fully identified with us while still being fully identified as God.
And the fact that they were sleeping during this prayer, and that it's recorded what he said, goes to show that Jesus came and told them. It had to tell somebody this. For Matthew to write it down, but if they fell asleep and couldn't hear his prayer, then how is it being recorded for us? And the fact that Jesus wants them to understand what he had done.
And he's saying, I'm just troubled to the point of death.
Yeah, well, and remember, you go back, what are all the kingdom attitudes that he's expecting them to live? What are all the things he's asked them to do to put their trust in God, their faith in God? If you just have faith, and really what we're seeing here is Jesus is actually going to put his spirit to the Father, trust that the Father and the Spirit will raise him.
This is what it looks like.
Yeah. He had the power to raise himself from the dead,
Mm-hmm.
but I believe he relied upon the Father and the Spirit to raise him from the dead.
As the song says, he could have called 10,000 angels.
Yeah. And so he is showing what the kingdom life looks like right here
And
by
he's
self-denial.
He's doing it related to it as a human, as one of us.
Yeah.
So we need to relate to it as well.
Yeah.
While he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, came up accompanied by a large crowd with swords and clubs, who came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he who was betraying him came up, gave them a sign, saying, "Whomever I kiss, he's the one. Seize him." This Judas guy, he's got it bad. Immediately, Judas went up to Jesus and said, "Hail, Rabbi," and kissed him. And Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you've come to do." Friend. And I don't think he's being sarcastic. He was his friend, the best friend he ever had, but he didn't understand that it was a two-way street.
Remember the Zechariah 3:13-7, from the house of my friends.
Friend. Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. This is not a gentle laying on hands. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus reached and drew the sword. Now, who is that?
Peter.
Simon Peter. So I think what he said, if I have to die, I will. At this moment, he's ready to die.
He's ready to die.
He struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back in its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. Or do you not think that I can appeal to my Father? He will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels." How then will the scriptures be fulfilled, which say that it must happen this way? So Peter has a courage like a warrior. And yes, if this is where we're going to go down, I'll go down.
Yeah.
He's not a good swordsman. He's pretty good with ears, but not much else. But Jesus is warning him to learn there is another kind of courage that asks far more of you, and I need that.
And there's a different way of fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, we've been talking about this upside down nature of the kingdom. First shall be last, last shall be first. If you want to fight for me and die for me, I'm not asking you to go out and to kill the enemy with a sword, but I'm asking you to serve your enemy. And through serving your enemy may still kill you, which will happen.
But you haven't lost.
You haven't lost.
And if you win, you've won the person's heart. He's one of you now.
Here's the thing: if you win fighting Jesus' way, everybody wins.
Everybody wins.
If you win fighting the way Peter wanted to fight, only one person wins.
That's right.
The one who wins the sword fight. The other one's dead.
It's probably not going to be Peter because he's not that good.
And it's a whole crowd of
I
clubs.
know. I mean, he's going down. At that time, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me, as you would against a robber? Every day they sit in the temple and teaching you. You did not seize me. But all this has taken place to fulfill the scriptures of the prophets." Then all the disciples left him, and he fled. They struck the shepherd, and the sheep fled. So you could have come out there when I'm in public and done this, but no, they're not going to do that because that's too dangerous for them. They got to connive around where they can catch him off in the dark and do it.
That, and he's telling him, have I ever given you the impression that I was going to fight back?
Right.
Have I ever? Now, once again, the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin have had to convince the crowds that he's public enemy number one, and he's uprising against the state, right? Building the secret kingdom. And
he's a very dangerous man, but not for the reasons you normally think of somebody.
Yeah, and the fact that he's being treated like a common thief or robber.
And his whole life testifies to the fact that's just so not true.
Yeah.
Those who had seized Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were gathered together. But Peter was following him at a distance as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and he entered and sat down with the officers. Apparently John has some connections here, gets him into this place, and Luke will have some things later on we'll look at that show what's going on here. Now the chief priests and the whole council kept saying trying to obtain false testimony against Jesus so they might put him to death. There's nothing right about this. They're willing to do what normally they would have said was wrong in order to get him. They did not find any, even though many false witnesses came forward, but later on two came forward and said, "This man stated, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." We just said it, actually recorded in John chapter 2.
Yeah, that's the ultimate blasphemy there.
I know. The high priest stood up and said to him, "Do you not answer? What is it that these men are testifying against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God that you tell us whether or not you are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, oh, I love it when he does it. I mean, he knows how to deal with these folks. "You have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his robes, said he was blaspheming, and further need would they have of witnesses since he had done this. "Behold, you have now heard the blasphemy." They're sort of setting him up. "What do you think?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and beat him with their fists, and others slapped him, said, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who's the one that's hitting you?" This is awful stuff here.
The fact that they are asking, "Tell us who you are." Once again, this goes back to that Matthew 16 thing. He's been telling them and showing them and teaching them
In ways that could not be denied.
in ways that cannot be denied. And this scene always gets me.
Mm-hmm.
His own people, just the slapping, punching, throwing around. It reminds me when I was little, we used to form these little circles outside of school, and we'd put one person in the circle, and it was the push circle.
Mm-hmm.
And the one time, I wasn't actually in one, a person was being pushed. His name was Dylan Kirkpatwinski. He got pushed outside the circle, and I just did this.
Mm-hmm.
He fell, bit his tongue completely off.
Oh, no.
And I remember feeling so bad. And I didn't, everything on accident. And the fact that these people are doing this on purpose and what they're doing to his face and his public fame and all, in front of all of his peers, in front of his disciples.
The brutality of human beings created in the image of God. As good as we can be bad. This is worse than animals.
And all that he's tried to do for them. Now, he knew it was coming, but it still doesn't stop the sting of what's going on.
Now, Peter was sitting outside the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, this bold man, apparently a big guy who talks pretty tough, a little servant girl comes up to him and says, "You were with Jesus in the garden." But he denied it before them, saying, "I do not know what you're talking about." When he had gone to the gateway, another servant girl came to him and said to those who were there, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again, he denied it with an oath. "I do not know the man." A little later, a bystander came up and said to Peter, "Surely you're one of them, for even the way you talk," Galilean talk, "gives you away." Then he began to curse, and that doesn't mean like we think about it. He's talking about how, "No, I did not do it, and I'll tell you why," and intensifying that. So he began to curse and swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the word which Jesus had said, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." He went out and wept bitterly.
What other response is there?
Yeah,
But to weep bitterly.
It catches up to him. The very thing I said I wouldn't do, I meant I wouldn't do. I was determined I would die and wouldn't do. Done it.
I kind of wish that every time we sinned, we had an image of what Jesus was going through. And every time we sinned, we realized our sin put him there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, every time you do not do the will of the Father, you are denying the Son. Thankfully, God does not hold every account of sin against us if we're in Christ. Thankfully, if we're walking in the light as He is in the light,
we're forgiven. His
blood continually cleanses us.
Mm-hmm. But we ought not to be casual about that. "Oh, well, I'm walking in the light." No, they're not if you're looking at it that way.
But this goes back to yesterday's reading of the people who want the bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Did Jesus give the bare minimum?
No.
I mean,
couldn't get much worse than this.
No. And I'll be honest, there are times I avoid reading these chapters because it makes me uncomfortable.
It's the cold slap in the face. What's happening with Peter here? You really, I can go along feeling pretty good about myself, but every once in a while, it hits me. And
Well, a lot of times we always want to relate to like the Davids and defeating the Goliaths, and the Moses who parts the Red Sea. That's the, and yet we all end up being Peters and Cains and all the people
all the
that
ne'er-do-wells.
and yet Jesus still loves us. Jesus still loves Peter. Judas is still his friend, right? Even though their relationship can't be what it was.
He's so constant.
He is. So I hope this reading, once again, has helped you, made you really kind of sit back. And once again, we don't want these readings just to be also a checkmark thing.
No.
Introspect, look at your own life, realize what Jesus went through for you, what he's about to go through as we're reading, and really take it to heart.
Yes. This is not meant to just be an intellectual exercise.
Yeah. All right, well, we love you.
Yes.
God loves you, and God bless.